another specimen with the septum pellucidum removed to show the cavity of the lateral ventricle and the choroid plexus lying on its floor. This is the choroidal fissure between the thalamus and the fornix. This is the body of the thalamus, and below it lies the hypothalamus, with the hypothalamic sulcus in between. This sulcus extends from the interventricular foramen anteriorly to the cerebral aqueduct of the midbrain posteriorly. This is the cerebral aqueduct. It lies between the tectum posteriorly and the tegmentum anteriorly. This is the tegmentum of the midbrain, and this is the tectum of the midbrain. Here lies the cavity of the third ventricle. Its lateral wall is formed by the thalamus above and hypothalamus below. This is the floor of the third ventricle, formed from before backwards by the optic chiasma, tuber cinereum, mammillary body, posterior perforated substance, and the tegmentum of the midbrain. In this region, note the following: the tuber cinereum, mammillary body, and posterior perforated substance are parts of the hypothalamus present in the floor of third ventricle. Now, let us demonstrate the third ventricle. It is a single ventricle present exactly in the midline between the two cerebral hemispheres. In this specimen, the third ventricle is specially dissected so as to show its two side walls and its cavity in between. This is the cavity of the ventricle, which is seen to be very narrow and is bounded by its two side walls. This cavity extends from the lamina terminalis anteriorly to the cerebral aqueduct and pineal body posteriorly. This is the lamina terminalis, and this is the pineal body. This is the cerebral aqueduct. The cavity of the third ventricle is traversed by interthalamic connexus, which extends between the two side walls. This is the cavity seen from above and is traversed by interthalamic connexus. Note how narrow the cavity is. The cavity has a roof, floor, and an anterior wall and posterior wall. Let us demonstrate its walls in another specimen. The roof is a thin layer of epididyma invaginated by the talar choroidy of the third ventricle. It is attached to the upper limit of the medial surface of the thalamus, extending from the interventricular foramen anteriorly to the pineal body posteriorly. The lateral wall consists of the thalamus above, the hypothalamus below, and the hypothalamic sulcus in between. The interventricular foramen of Monro lies in the lateral wall just anterior to the thalamus. The floor of the cavity consists of the following structures from before backwards: the optic chiasma, tuber cinerarium, mammillary bodies, posterior perforated substance, and tegmentum of the membrane. Note that the hypothalamus lies partly in the lateral wall and partly in the floor of the third ventricle. This is the anterior wall of the ventricle, formed by the lamina terminalis, with the anterior commissure directly posterior to it. Notice the recess, which extends from the cavity downwards towards the optic chiasma. Its posterior wall is formed by the stalk of the pineal body.